In the dim glow of a flickering candle, a young boy sat hunched over a tattered book, his fingers tracing the inked words like a treasure map leading to an unseen world. The boy had little formal education, just 2 years of school before poverty forced him into labor, but his hunger for knowledge was insatiable. By day, he worked as an apprentice in his brother's printing shop, inhaling the scent of fresh ink, and by night, he devoured books, scribbling notes, imitating great writers, and shaping his mind with every stroke of the quill. This boy, born into a family of 17 children with no wealth or noble status, would one day rise to become one of the most brilliant minds in history. His name was Benjamin Franklin, a man who taught himself everything from science to philosophy, business to diplomacy, invention to leadership. Without a college degree, without wealth or privilege, Franklin became a statesman, an inventor, a writer, and a philosopher, shaping not only his own destiny, but the fate of an entire nation. How did a self-educated, bookish boy with no formal training go on to unlock the mysteries of electricity, write some of the most influential words in American history, and leave behind a legacy that still shapes our world today? Franklin's life is not just a tale of success. It is a blueprint for self-made greatness, proving that intelligence, curiosity, and relentless self-improvement can transform an ordinary life into an extraordinary one. On a cold winter morning, January 17, 1706, in a modest house on Milk Street in Boston, a baby boy took his first breath. Unbeknownst to the world, he would one day shape the course of history. Benjamin Franklin, the 15th of 17 children, was born into a family that knew neither luxury nor ease. His father, Josiah Franklin, was a hard-working Englishman who had immigrated to America in search of opportunity. A tallow chandler by trade, Josiah spent his days making candles and soap, his hands always stained with wax, his life dictated by the rising and setting of the sun. Franklin's mother, Abiah Folger, was a strong and resourceful woman, raising a house filled with children in a world where survival depended on diligence and thrift. From an early age, young Benjamin was surrounded by the constant hum of industry. The Franklin household was a bustling, crowded space where resources were scarce and children were expected to contribute. Though his father dreamed of sending him to school for the clergy, money was tight, and by the time Benjamin was 10 years old, his formal education had ended. But something extraordinary stirred within him, an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. He devoured any book he could find, sneaking moments of reading between chores, his mind traveling far beyond the walls of his father's candle shop. Unlike other children content with their lot, Benjamin was different, restless, curious, and determined. Even at a young age, he sensed that his future would not be defined by wax and tallow, but by words, wisdom, and the boundless pursuit of learning. Long before Benjamin Franklin tamed lightning, penned wise sayings, or charmed entire nations with his wit, he was just a scrappy, book-hungry boy wandering the streets of Boston, desperate for something, anything, to read. Unlike other children who crave sweets or adventure, young Ben had an insatiable appetite for knowledge, and since books were scarce, he devoured them like a man sneaking extra helpings at dinner. Born into a family of 17 children, yes, 17, Franklin quickly learned that if he wanted to be heard, he had to be clever. His father, Josiah, was a candle maker, and by the age of 10, Franklin was pulled out of school to dip wicks into vats of tallow. But he had no intention of spending his life smelling like melted wax. Books, he believed, were his ticket to a different kind of future. The problem? Books were expensive, and his father wasn't exactly handing out allowances for literary indulgences. So Franklin did what any determined, book-starved child would do. He found a way. He befriended booksellers and borrowed whatever he could get his hands on. He read at night by candlelight, ironically, thanks to his father's candles, long after the rest of the family had collapsed into sleep. He even skipped meals just to afford more books, trading loaves of bread for pages of wisdom. While other kids spent their pennies on sweets, Franklin spent his on second-hand philosophy and science texts. If someone in town had a book, Franklin would charm, beg, or bargain his way into borrowing it, and sometimes return it looking more worn than when it left. His love for books soon transformed him into a writer. By mimicking the essays of great authors, Franklin taught himself how to write persuasively, but he needed practice, so he did something both genius and slightly mischievous. He wrote anonymous letters to his brother's newspaper under the pen name Silence Dogood, pretending to be a witty, middle-aged widow. The letters were filled with sharp humor and wisdom, and the readers loved them. His brother? Not so much. When Franklin finally revealed that he was the mysterious Silence Dogood, his brother was furious, probably because a teenager had just outwitted him in front of all of Boston. By the time Franklin was a teenager, he had already read more books than most adults would in a lifetime. His mind overflowed with ideas, and he was ready for something bigger. So, at the age of 17, he did what all great adventurers do. He ran away. With nothing but a few coins in his pocket and a brain bursting with knowledge, he set off for Philadelphia, where his real journey would begin. When Benjamin Franklin arrived in Philadelphia, fresh off a long journey, he didn't look like a future inventor, statesman, or founding father. He looked like a runaway apprentice covered in dust, clutching a few coins and desperately in need of a snack. But unlike most 17-year-olds, Franklin wasn't interested in loafing around, unless, of course, that loaf came with a side of reading material. Philadelphia was full of opportunities, and Franklin wanted them all. He quickly found work as a printer, which was the perfect job for a book addict. Surrounded by ink and paper all day, he had unlimited access to knowledge. When he wasn't setting type or running the printing press, he had his nose buried in books, science, philosophy, history, business, and even self-improvement. If an idea existed in print, Franklin wanted it inside his brain. But Franklin didn't just read for fun. He read with a purpose. He wasn't content to just be the best read man in Philadelphia. He wanted to be the smartest, most capable, and most successful person in any room. And being Franklin, he had a plan. Step 1. Read everything you can get your hands on. Franklin borrowed, bought, and when necessary, charmed his way into access to more books. Step 2. Write and think like the greats. Franklin copied the style of the best writers, turning great essays into puzzles he would rewrite from memory to improve his skills. Step 3. Experiment with ideas. If he read about health, he changed his diet. He even tried vegetarianism for a while, just to see how it worked. If he read about morality, he built a self-improvement system with 13 virtues that he tracked daily. And then Franklin did something that only Franklin would think of. He started his own secret club. Not satisfied with just reading books, Franklin wanted to discuss and debate ideas with other bright minds. But instead of waiting for the perfect intellectual circle, he created one. The Junto Club, which Franklin later jokingly called the Leather Apron Club because they were working-class thinkers, met every week to discuss philosophy, science, and self-improvement. They asked thought-provoking questions, debated ethical dilemmas, and helped each other grow. Of course, Franklin being Franklin, he didn't just stop at talking about ideas, he turned them into action. The Junto led to Philadelphia's first public library because Franklin realized not everyone could afford books like he could, which, considering he was skipping meals for them, was saying something. By the time Franklin was in his 20s, he had self-educated himself into one of the most brilliant minds in America. His love for books and learning would fuel every success he ever had, from inventing the lightning rod to helping draft the Declaration of Independence. By the time Benjamin Franklin was in his 20s, his brain was practically a library. If knowledge was power, Franklin was slowly turning into a human power plant, one book at a time. While other young men were busy spending their money on fancy clothes or nights out, Franklin had only one vice: books. He bought them, borrowed them, debated them, and, most importantly, devoured them. Not literally, of course, though he probably would have if ink was nutritious. Franklin's favorite books, his secret superpower. Franklin didn't just read anything. He read strategically. He picked books that could make him smarter, more persuasive, and more useful in society. Some of his favorites included essays by Plutarch, because if you're going to learn from someone, why not learn from ancient leaders? Franklin admired Plutarch's wisdom on politics, leadership, and life, lessons that would later help him shape a brand new country. The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, a book about self-improvement and overcoming obstacles. Perfect for a young Franklin, who was constantly setting goals and tracking his virtues like a scientist tracking an experiment. Essays by Joseph Addison and Richard Steele. These essays taught Franklin how to write persuasively, think critically, and most importantly, be entertaining. Little did he know this skill would later help him charm both readers and world leaders alike. The Bible. Even though Franklin wasn't the most religious man, he still appreciated the moral wisdom, storytelling, and rhetorical power of the scriptures. Defoe's writings, like Robinson Crusoe. Perhaps because Franklin himself was like Crusoe, always finding ways to survive, thrive, and build his own future. Of course, Franklin's obsession with books got out of hand, at least financially. At one point, he spent so much money on books that he had to live on bread and water for weeks. His friends teased him about his frugality, but Franklin didn't mind. By the time Benjamin Franklin had turned himself into a walking library of knowledge, he had also developed another superpower, the ability to win arguments with style, wit, and a touch of mischief. While other men of his time argued with raised voices and stubborn tempers, Franklin had a different strategy. He made people agree with him before they even realized it. Franklin didn't just debate, he outsmarted. He believed that direct contradiction and aggressive arguments were the fastest way to make enemies. Instead of saying, "You're wrong," Franklin would say, "Perhaps I may be mistaken, but it seems to me," and just like that, he invited his opponent into a trap of reason and logic. One of Franklin's most brilliant and slightly hilarious debate tactics was telling stories instead of making direct arguments. He knew that people hated being told they were wrong, but everyone loved a good story. So, Franklin would weave a clever tale that just happened to prove his point. By the time he finished, his opponent would nod in agreement, only to realize later that Franklin had completely flipped their viewpoint without them noticing. Franklin's love for clever writing began early. When he was just a teenager, working for his older brother James, who owned a newspaper, Franklin desperately wanted to contribute. But there was just one problem. James didn't take him seriously, so Franklin did what any mischievous genius would do. He tricked him. Under the fake name Silence Dogood, Franklin wrote letters to the newspaper pretending to be a wise and witty middle-aged widow. These letters were so sharp, so funny, and so full of wisdom that they became incredibly popular. Readers adored Silence Dogood's take on society, politics, and human nature, and Franklin sat back, watching his words influence the public. It wasn't until James found out that his own little brother had been the author all along that things got messy. Furious that Franklin had outwitted him, and that people loved Silence Dogood more than his own writing, James kicked him out of the printing business. Franklin, however, left laughing, because by then he had already proven he could win any debate with intelligence and creativity. Years later, Franklin would take his debate skills from the streets of Philadelphia to the grand halls of diplomacy. When the American colonies were still under British rule, Franklin was sent to London to negotiate with British leaders. Armed with nothing but his wit, charm, and years of reading philosophy and politics, Franklin outmaneuvered British politicians in debates about taxation and freedom. He exposed the hypocrisy of British rule with logic so sharp that some British leaders were left stuttering in response. Even when war broke out and Franklin was sent to France to secure an alliance, he used the same story-driven, strategic approach to win over the French court. Instead of making dull, dry political arguments, Franklin told stories of American resilience, independence, and spirit. By the time he was finished, France had not only agreed to help the American Revolution, but did so with enthusiasm. Franklin's gift of argument wasn't just about proving he was right, it was about persuading people without making enemies. He mastered the power of storytelling, humor, and carefully chosen words to make people think, laugh, and eventually say, "You know, I think Franklin has a point." Benjamin Franklin had a mind as sharp as a lightning bolt and a tongue that could outwit kings, but he knew something crucial. Intelligence alone wasn't enough. If he wanted to truly shape his destiny, he needed self-discipline. And so, being Benjamin Franklin, he didn't just try to be disciplined. He turned it into an experiment. The 13 Virtue Challenge, turning life into a science project. Most people try to improve themselves by making vague promises like, "I'll wake up earlier," or "I'll stop eating pie for breakfast." Franklin, however, took a much more serious approach. At the age of 20, he sat down with a notebook, took a deep breath, and invented his own system for personal perfection. He identified 13 virtues that he believed would make him the best possible version of himself. The plan? He would master one virtue each week, cycling through them 4 times a year. And thus, the great Franklin self-discipline experiment began. The 13 virtues, or how to be the best. Benjamin Franklin Possible. 1. Temperance. No overeating or overdrinking. Goodbye, excessive beer nights. 2. Silence. Speak only when it benefits others. Less gossip, more wisdom. 3. Order. Keep things organized. Finally, no more lost socks. 4. Resolution. Always follow through on decisions. No more unfinished projects. 5. Frugality. Waste nothing. Pennies saved equals books bought. 6. Industry. Always be productive. Work hard, learn more. 7. Sincerity. Be honest and speak from the heart. No empty flattery. 8. Justice. Treat people fairly, even when debating. 9. Moderation. Avoid extremes. 1 slice of pie is fine, 7 is not. 10. Cleanliness. Stay physically and mentally tidy. Goodbye, messy desk. 11. Tranquility. Don't stress over little things. Not every problem is a storm. 12. Chastity. Exercise self-control in relationships. Ahem. Moving on. 13. Humility. Imitate Socrates and Jesus. No bragging, even about self-discipline. Franklin was confident he could master all 13 virtues, but as he went through his cycle of self-improvement, he hit a roadblock. Order. He tried, he really did. He made schedules, he labeled things. He promised himself he wouldn't let his desk turn into a disaster zone. But no matter how hard he tried, his workspace always seemed to end up looking like a hurricane had personally visited. Eventually, Franklin had to admit defeat. "A speckled axe is best," he wrote, meaning nobody's perfect, even him. Though he never mastered perfect order, Franklin's commitment to discipline made him one of the most productive people in history. He woke up at 5 a.m. every day, a true flex in a world without alarm clocks. He structured his days down to the hour, balancing work, study, and self-improvement. He tracked his progress in a notebook, marking each day he successfully practiced a virtue. He used self-discipline to master multiple skills, from writing to inventing to negotiating. And perhaps most importantly, he realized that true success wasn't about being perfect. It was about constantly improving. Benjamin Franklin never became a saint, nor did he want to. What he did achieve, however, was something even more useful, a practical system for lifelong growth. His virtue tracking method inspired countless self-improvement books. His commitment to daily habits set the foundation for modern productivity strategies. His belief in self-discipline over luck became a core American value. And let's be honest, his habit of waking up at 5 a.m. still makes the rest of me feel a little guilty. Benjamin Franklin had spent years reading everything in sight, perfecting the art of argument and turning self-discipline into a science project. But what good is all that knowledge if you don't do anything with it? Franklin wasn't about to let his carefully cultivated intelligence go to waste. Armed with his love for learning, his sharp wit, and a schedule so efficient it would put modern planners to shame, he launched himself into a life of success, printing his way to the top. One of Franklin's first big breaks came when he started his own printing business in Philadelphia. He didn't just print newspapers, he made them interesting. While other papers were dry and filled with tedious announcements, Franklin's Pennsylvania Gazette was filled with sharp humor, witty observations, and practical advice, which often came from none other than Franklin himself, disguised under various pen names. Readers ate it up, and soon his paper became one of the most popular in the colonies. But Franklin wasn't just writing about success, he was building it. In 1733, he published Poor Richard's Almanac, filled with wisdom, humor, and practical advice on everything from saving money to avoiding foolish behavior. The book became an instant hit, and Franklin's clever little sayings, like "early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise," became timeless proverbs. Now, let's be honest, did Franklin always follow his own advice? Not exactly. He loved lively conversation, and there's plenty of evidence that he enjoyed staying up late debating with friends. But did that stop him from writing like he was the wisest man alive? Absolutely not. And it worked. The inventor who made life easier and occasionally shocked himself. Franklin's curiosity and problem-solving skills made him a natural inventor. Unlike other inventors who dreamed of creating things for fame, Franklin just wanted to make life a little easier and maybe avoid burning down the house in the process. The Franklin stove, a heating system that warmed homes more efficiently, because why should people freeze when they can be cozy and smart at the same time? Bifocals, glasses that helped you see up close and far away, perfect for Franklin, who wanted to read his books and also keep an eye on everything happening around him. The lightning rod, because apparently Franklin looked at a thunderstorm and thought, what if I stick a metal rod on top of a building and see what happens? Answer: science happens. Of course, his famous kite experiment, where he flew a kite with a metal key during a thunderstorm to prove that lightning was electricity, was equal parts genius and insane. Franklin somehow survived, unlike many copycats who were not as lucky, founding a nation and convincing the French to help. As Franklin grew older, he wasn't content just printing newspapers and occasionally electrocuting himself. He had bigger plans, like helping to create an entirely new country. When tensions between the American colonies and Britain boiled over into revolution, Franklin was at the center of it all. He helped draft the Declaration of Independence, proving that a man who once had to borrow books just to read could now write history itself. But writing was only half the battle. Franklin also had to convince France to help the struggling American revolutionaries. Now, most people might approach international diplomacy with stiff formalities. Not Franklin. He used charm, wit, and good old-fashioned storytelling to win over the French court. He showed up in Paris wearing a fur hat to play up his image as a rustic American. The French loved him, so much so that Franklin became a celebrity in France, with people wearing his face on medallions. And, more importantly, they agreed to help America fight Britain. So yes, Benjamin Franklin essentially flirted his way into securing military aid. Now that's diplomacy, his greatest success, leaving a legacy. By the time Franklin was in his 70s, he had accomplished more than most people could dream of. Helped start America. Check. Invented useful things. Check. Became a best-selling author. Check. Avoided electrocution long enough to write about it. Check. But Franklin didn't stop. Even in his final years, he was still writing, debating, and advocating for important causes. One of his last great contributions? Fighting against slavery. Though he once had complicated views on the subject, Franklin spent his later years pushing for abolition, proving that even the wisest minds can evolve. When he passed away in 1790 at the age of 84, 20,000 people attended his funeral, a staggering number for the time. His legacy? A nation built on the very principles he had championed: hard work, intelligence, self-discipline, and of course, an occasional, well-placed joke. The lesson of Franklin's success. So, what can we learn from the man who taught himself nearly everything, charmed his way across the world, and helped build a nation? Read constantly, because knowledge is power. Write well, because words can change history. Experiment boldly, but maybe don't fly kites in thunderstorms. Stay curious, because every great success starts with a simple question. Use humor, because wisdom without wit is just another lecture. In the end, Benjamin Franklin wasn't just successful, he was unforgettable. And if he had one last piece of advice for us, it would probably be this: either write something worth reading or do something worth writing about.